At the time of the conquest of the Prussians in the 13th century with full approval of Christian Europe, the era of the building of German militarism began. This took place under the German Teutonic Order of the Sign of the Black Cross. The whole Christian idea of this order was well described in the 16th century by Andrew Zajki, Archbishop of Gniezno. There are 3 crosses, a red one on which Christ was crucified, a white cross was hung next to Christ, a robber begging for forgiveness for his sins, and a black cross on which was crucified a robber blaspheming against Christ. It is this cross which was worn on the cloaks of the Order of Teutonic Knights. The order was originally set up to ensure the safety of the pilgrims to the Holy Land and the tomb of Christ, and even here it lost its Christian ideals. At the end of the 12th century the order was forced to leave Palestine, and at end of the 13th Syria, to establish its headquarters in Venice. The foundations of the rules of Christian order regarding poverty and servitude had nothing in common with the Teutonic order, and this became even more evident when in 1230 the order came to the Prussian land. Without doubt, when the order was founded, and also later, it became arm of the papacy, and also had the support of all the Christian monarchs of Europe. Because of this it had access to unlimited material resources in the whole Europe. However, the order needed a military base in which the local subjected population, deprived of its social structures, was needed to maintain and service the order. Because of this, after the conquest of the Prussian land, the colonizers began the building of a feudal state belonging to the order. However, this did not suffice for the German knights of the order, who suffered from the incurable illness of this European nation which lasted for centuries, until recent times, of the policy of Drangnakossen. Its aims were the conquest of the next peoples in the Baltic hinterland, in Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia. To summarize the facts about the order and German militarism, it is simplest to adopt a chronological order. The Teutonic Order was formed to aid Christians on their pilgrimages to the Holy Land and to establish hospitals. Its members have commonly been known as the Teutonic Knights, having a small voluntary and mercenary military membership, serving as a crusading military order for protection of Christians in the Holy Land and the Baltics during the Middle Ages. Formed in the year 1192 in Acre, in the Levant, the medieval order played an important role in the general Crusader states, also known as Outremer, controlling the port tolls of Acre. After Christian forces were defeated in the Middle East, the order moved to Transylvania in 1211. The Teutonic Order already had experience of operating on another frontier within the non-Christian world, having served in early 13th century Hungary. At this time Hungary was a rapidly evolving military state, with Magyar tribal armies who had created the state in the 10th century, supported by nomadic or semi-nomadic refugees from the Eurasian steppes. But Hungarian kings also encouraged Westerners to settle, to bolster the feudal army that they were creating. Since the mid-12th century, Germans had also been encouraged to colonize southeastern Transylvania, a rather primitive and almost autonomous region in what is now eastern Hungary and western Romania. When King Andrew mentioned his problem with the Cummins to Count Hermann or his emissaries, it was suggested, it seems likely, that the Teutonic Knights could protect the frontier and make it possible for the king to go on crusade with a free mind. King Andrew promised lands in the endangered region and immunities from taxes and duties. This implied that the order could bring in settlers and maintain itself from their rents and labor without having to share its hard-won early revenues with the monarch. The Teutonic Knights had sent a contingent into the unsettled region, had built a series of wood and earth forts, and brought in peasants from Germany to farm the land and provide the taxes and labor that were necessary to construct more fortifications and buildings and to harvest the crops that fed the garrisons. King Andrew had sailed to the Holy Land in 1217 with a large army in the company of Hermann von Sulzer and a force of Teutonic Knights, but failed to achieve any success. Meanwhile, the contingent of Teutonic Knights in Hungary had not been content to act the part of quiet vassals, defending the frontier in a static manner. They were ambitious and aggressive, pressing outward against the commons, and they found it easy to occupy new territories, because the nomads had no permanent places to provide centers of resistance. By 1220 the Teutonic Knights had built 5 castles that became bases for expansion into the practically unpopulated common lands, an expansion that went forward with surprising speed. This aroused the jealousy and suspicion of the Hungarian nobles and clergy who previously had shown little interest in the region. The Hungarian nobles did not understand the special organization and dedication that made it possible for a crusading order to succeed where they had failed. For their part, the Teutonic Knights made little effort to win friends among the Hungarian nobility. They ignored the rights of the local bishop and refused to share their conquests with those important nobles who had previously held title to the region. It was only natural that the Teutonic Knights did not wish to surrender what had been won by their labor and money, particularly when they would need every parcel of land and every village to provide the resources in food, taxes, and infantry for future campaigns toward the Black Sea. As the Hungarian nobles came to see it, King Andrew had unwisely invited in a group of interlopers who were making themselves so secure in their border principality that soon the king himself would not be able to control them. They accused the order of overstepping its duty to defend the border and of planning to become a kingdom within the kingdom. King Andrew meanwhile had returned home to a kingdom bitter about the losses and the expenses of his crusade. His reputation had fallen badly, and the country had suffered in the absence of firm government. In 1222 the nobility forced from him a document called the Golden Bull, which was very similar to the Magna Carta the English barons had extorted from their unlucky king only a few years before. When the nobility demanded that he take back his grants to the Teutonic Order, the king was in a poor state to refuse them, but he did. He examined the complaints, concluded that the order had indeed exceeded their mandate, and agreed that changes should be made in the charters. But he ended by issuing a new charter more extensive in its terms than the first. He allowed the Teutonic Knights to build castles in stone, and, although his grant forbade them to recruit Hungarian or Romanian settlers, he implicitly approved their having brought in German peasants. Hermann von Sulzer was in Germany in 1223 and 1224 on imperial business. While he was in Germany, Hermann thought about the situation in Hungary. When he returned to Italy, he spoke to Pope Honorius about the problem. Subsequently, the Pope took the lands in Transylvania under papal protection. In effect, the Burzenland became a fief of the Holy See. After that incident, King Andrew ordered the Teutonic Knights to leave Hungary immediately. He was not willing to see a valuable province lost, stolen from his kingdom by a legal trick. The order was driven ignominiously from their lands and expelled from the kingdom. Only the peasantry remained, forming an important German settlement until 1945. The Hungarian debacle shook the Teutonic Order to its foundations. Many men had given their lives, and much money had been collected with difficulty to build the fortifications and make the new settlements secure. Not it was all lost. The order thought that could thrive in Germanic regions, though, winning recruits and donations from the idealistic nobles and burghers, who admired it. But it had no reason to operate in those areas. To have a purpose for existence, the Teutonic Knights had to fight infidels or pagans. The Prussian Crusade was a series of 13th century campaigns of Roman Catholic crusaders, primarily led by the Teutonic Knights, to Christianize the pagan Prussians and appropriating by the Germans of the lands of the Baltic tribes. Invited after earlier unsuccessful expeditions against the Prussians by Polish princes, the Teutonic Knights began campaigning against the Balts in 1230. By the end of the century, having quelled several Prussian uprisings, the Knights had established control over Prussia and administered the Prussians through their monastic state. A problem of Christianization of Prussians was so big that the Duke Conrad I of Masovia had requested from the papacy to aid the Poles in purging the heretical pagans from the territory of the Kingdom of Poland, and to bring Prussia under Christian rule. The response from the Pope came in the form of the monastic military Teutonic Order. They were given order to wage a crusade in the Baltics, and to forcibly baptize anyone willing to join, slaughter and expel the rest that refused to do so. From the viewpoint of Duke Conrad, Helmno was only to be used as a temporary base against the Prussians, and future conquests were to be under the authority of the Duke of Masovia. The first to fall under governance of the Teutonic Knights was the region of Pomerania, and with a clever ambush that netted them their leader Pepin, Prussian resistance in Cumberland was quelled with little opposition. Reinforcements for the Teutonic Order came in the form of 5,000 veterans that were given to them by Burgrave of Magdeburg, and as Germanic settlers began to immigrate to the newly conquered land, they began building new towns each passing year. They cemented control over the land for the Teutonic Knights. So they began to settle in foreign countries, usurping their rights to them. The war for control over Prussia was brutal. Historical records show that in documents written during their conquest of Prussia, the pagans had found a big weakness in the heavily armored knights. Although the land itself was still not fully conquered, the Teutonic Order had built castles and fortifications along their crusade in every part of Prussia, which gave them a solid foothold that plagued the pagans as they attempted to besiege, but each time they accomplished nothing more than slaughtering small expedition forces. The conquest of Prussia took some 50 years of continuous bloodshed to complete, during which time native Prussians who remained UN-baptized were subjugated, killed or exiled. Many battles between knights and Prussians were ferocious. In some lands the people were exterminated, leaving a barren land. No human life remained. Empty Prussian land soon became inhabited by German settlers, and any remaining old Prussians became peasants or were assimilated with the Germans and vanished from the pages of history. Later German settlers started calling themselves Prussians, and so the Kingdom of Prussia was so formed. Approximately 80,000 Prussians were exterminated during the conquest. Of about 10,000 have fled to Poland and about 5,000 to Lithuania. It is estimated that no more like 80,000 stayed alive. Later, after the conquest, Prussians escaped to Poland were widespread. These losses are objectively given, could be bigger. 14th century by the Teutonic Knights continued combat of war, first in Lithuania, later in Poland. The Lithuanian Crusade was a series of campaigns by the Teutonic Order and the Lithuanian Order, two crusading military orders, to convert the pagan Grand Duchy of Lithuania into Roman Catholicism. The Lithuanian Order settled in Riga in 1202 and the Teutonic Order arrived to Cumberland in 1230s. They first conquered other neighboring Baltic tribes, Curonians, Semigalians, Latgalians, Silonians, Old Prussians. The first trade against the Lithuanians and Samogitians was in 1208, and the orders played a key role in Lithuanian politics, but they were not a direct and immediate threat until 1280s. By that time the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was already an established state and could offer organized defense. Thus for the next 100 years the knights organized annual destructive raids into the Samogitian and Lithuanian lands, but without great success. Border regions in Samogitia and Suvorkija became sparsely inhabited wilderness, but the order gained very little territory. The Grand Duchy finally converted to Christianity in 1386, when Grand Duke Jagala accepted baptism from Poland before his wedding to reigning Queen Jadwiga and coronation as King of Poland. However, the baptism did not stop the Crusaders. The order publicly challenged sincerity of the conversion at the papal court. Lithuania, together with its new powerful ally Poland, defeated the order in the decisive Battle of Grunwald in 1410, which is often cited as the end of the Lithuanian Crusade. The final peace was reached by the Treaty of Melno in 1422.
Christ ist erstanden von den Toten, im Tode bezwang er den Tod und schenkte den Entschlafenen das Leben. Christ ist erstanden von den Toten, im Tode bezwang er den Tod und schenkte den Entschlafenen das Leben. Christ ist erstanden von den Toten, im Tode bezwang er den Tod und schenkte den Entschlafenen das Leben. Christ ist erstanden von den Toten, im Tode bezwang er den Tod und schenkte den Entschlafenen das Leben. Christ ist erstanden von den den Entschlafenen das Leben. Christ ist erstanden von den Toten, im Tode bezwang er den Tod und schenkte den Entschlafenen das Leben.
Gott steht auf, seine Feinde zerstieben und ihn hassen, fliehen vor seinem Angesicht.
Christ ist erstanden von den Toten bis an den Tod und schenkte den Entschlafenen das Leben.
Wie Rauch verweht, so verwehen sie, wie Wachs vor dem Feuer zerfließt.
Christ ist erstanden von den Toten bis an den Tod und schenkte den Entschlafenen das Leben.
So vergeht vor Gott die Bösen, doch die Gerechten sind froh.
Christ ist erstanden von den Toten bis an den Tod und schenkte den Entschlafenen das Leben.
Dies ist der Tag, den der Herr gemacht, lasst uns jubeln und seiner uns freuen.
Christ ist erstanden von den Toten bis an den Tod und schenkte den Entschlafenen das Leben.
Ehre sei dem Vater und dem Sohn und dem Heiligen Geiste.
Christ ist erstanden von den Toten bis an den Tod und schenkte den Entschlafenen das Leben.
Jetzt jetzt und alle Zeit und von Ewigkeit zu Ewigkeit. Amen.
Christus ist erstanden von den Toten bis auf den Tod und schenkte den Schafen das Leben. Christ ist erstanden von den Toten, im Tode bezwang er den Tod und schenkte